Welcome to the Maverick Podcast. Hello to all my Maverick friends. I'm your host, Kathy Rose, head Maverick for the moment. Today, we have Pam Gregory back with us. She's a superstar astrologer and spiritual person and Maverick. I'm really excited to have her talk with us again. We're going to have a very, very interesting conversation about something I know a lot about, which is synesthesia. And I want to introduce it to Pam and get her thoughts on this topic. So let's invite her in. Come on board.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello.
Wonderful to be with you again.
Likewise here. The pleasure is all mine. So I want to talk about this topic, synesthesia. And I brought it up to you and threw it out to you, about a month ago and said, let's talk about this. And I remember you said, I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure I use it. You had a little bit of trepidation at first, right?
Like a lamb to the slaughter. But still smiling.
Okay, well, you're very brave to come on and talk about this. And I want to assure you that it's painless and there is a method to my madness. So let me begin by just a little introduction of this concept, and then we're going to get into this great conversation. Okay, synesthesia is really cross-sensing. I believe it is a way to get more information out of life, and I believe it is something we can all develop. Now, if you research this, anybody who's listening, if they go to Google and they research synesthesia, they're going to see that brain scientists say only some people have this. And I very much disagree because I've taught a lot of people how to activate it within themselves. And it is my belief that with synesthesia, you're really sensing frequency. So one more thought, and that is, I think that's where we're all going. You know, Absolutely. The big Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, that happened December of 2020 and January 2021. Starting this new 200-year cycle with Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions taking place in air signs, I think that is going to the matter of perception. And synesthesia addresses perception, right?
Yeah, and this is beautiful because just a few minutes ago, as I was thinking about coming on with you, Kathy, I was thinking exactly that. This is how we are going to evolve our sort of psychic sensitivity.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Of training us, if you like, or training ourselves to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I sent you a questionnaire. I sent you a research project that I have done astrologically. And I asked you to look at it and think about your answers to all of these things. And I want to start asking some of these questions and see what you thought. But even before we do that, when you read these questions, which we're going to go over in a second, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I was kind of curious. Well, firstly, honestly, terror. So this is going to be public, followed by curiosity, followed by thinking this is another important step in our human evolution, which is coming down the track really fast.
Mm-hmm. Synesthesia, I think, is very much connected to a particular planetary frequency in astrology. You know, I'm one of those that when I look at astrology, I'm thinking in terms of frequency for the planets, frequency for the signs, right? So I think it's very connected to Neptune, the Neptunian response, right? So question number 1, I proposed, please recall a memory when you were filled with laughter, perhaps from pure silliness or a wonderful comedic moment. Bring back the belly laugh, tears streaming down your face. Bring back that memory. Fill yourself with the feeling. Now, if that type of happiness had a smell, what would it be?
Daffodils.
Daffodils. Ooh, interesting. And what about...
Just to say, I remember the moment, it was a couple of years ago, I was in Portugal with a friend in biblical rain, trying to translate Portuguese from a Portuguese parking meter. And it doesn't seem at all funny now, but I became completely hysterical just with the overwhelm of the whole situation. And I was just on my knees sobbing eventually because it was just such a ridiculous moment. So yes, daffodils, sunshine. Yeah.
Sunshine. So the color would it be yellow? It's yellow for me also. And the smell for me is more like citrus, like lemon, wonderful lemon. And isn't it interesting if you think about lemon, if you think about the taste or the smell of lemon, do you think about yellow?
Yes, instantly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find that so fascinating. And I don't know if that's conditioning, but I feel like lemon has a yellow frequency to it, whether I knew what color the fruit was or not. So if it was music, if that happy memory was music, what kind of rhythm would it have?
Honky tonk.
Honky tonk. That's so fascinating because see, everybody's going to have a different answer to this. But when you look at the horoscope, do you ever think in terms of rhythm when you're looking at cycles, when you're looking at transits?
Yes.
Do you think of rhythms?
Yes, absolutely. Rhythms of the planets and rhythms of the cycles. Yes, yes, absolutely.
Do you ever hear it?
Not yet, but I certainly think of it and probably feel it. Yes.
Feel it.
Yes.
And again, if we take our 5 physical senses, taste, smell, touch, hearing, sight, and we just cross those over and convert any experience in multi-sensorial perceptions, it can be any one of those. When I look at the horoscope, I always hear and feel and sense rhythms. What I'm trying to convey to the client is this is a particularly fast-paced time, and I might hear pop, 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 pop. Or if I'm saying to a client, I might say, this is like the middle phase of microwave popcorn. You put microwave popcorn in because it's such people know that, right? And it starts off going pop, pop, the random slow pop. And then you get to that middle phase when everything explodes, pop, 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 pop. And then it dies down again to a random pop here or there. That's how I experience the horoscope, in one of those types of rhythms.
But that's a great way to explain it also to a client, because it's very graphic, isn't it? It's very clear.
And you can smell the popcorn. So that memory, brings in scent, and it involves all of your senses.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll help them remember it, not just understand it, but remember it, because it's so sensorial.
So the next question was, bring to mind, and here's how I phrased it. Bring to mind when you had an unwelcome, not so great surprise. Perhaps you experienced this as bad news, because nobody wants to remember bad news. But, let's say an unwelcome, not so great surprise. What color would that not so great surprise be?
Dark gray.
Dark gray. Isn't it interesting? You go from a light shade for happiness, and you go to a dark shade for maybe bad news or unwelcome surprise. I would even say it becomes murky. Not only is it dark, but it's murky, it's muddy. It's interesting how color, and especially the artist in me, when I would say, well, that's a muddy color, that's a clear color, the tonal quality like that, they all carry frequencies.
I can see it a little bit in people's auras. Colors a little bit to some extent in people's auras as well. And the color will tell me something about the person's mood. Yes.
And sometimes a lot of times I can sense the color in the aura, but sometimes I just get the texture or the shape or the pattern or the overall. See, I can't put it into words. I can't. Let's just say, if the not so great, unwelcome surprise may be bad news, if it had a sound, what sound would it be?
Flash of cymbals.
Ooh, interesting. That's really, yeah. I would say a thud. Boom.
Interesting. Yes, that would work too. Either way, the cymbals are kind of the shock.
Yes. Very good. Yeah. And so now we're talking about nuances of that experience and how it changes based on what that experience was. Yeah. if the not so welcome surprise, the bad news, if it was a fabric, if you went to the fabric store and I said, pick a fabric, that would be like bad news. What would that be? What would the texture be?
Velcro, that's very rough.
Yes.
Very rough to the touch. Almost in England, we have Brillo pads for cleaning pans, very abrasive. It's that kind of a texture. Rough.
I can't even touch Brillo pads. I have very sensitive fingertips, and there are certain fabrics I cannot touch, or certain textures I can't touch. And I was like that as a small child. It's certain really scratchy fabrics. And I remember just recoiling as a child. Like, one of our comforters had that. I said, I can't touch that. I just can't touch it. My mom said, what is wrong with you? And it's like, that has a frequency that I don't like. Brillo pads.
Taurus energy too, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
So Taurus energy, the senses are so heightened, particularly touch. So you'd be super sensitive.
Yes. And I have a strong Neptune component in my chart. So if the bad news, if it was a taste, how would bad news taste? Sour. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sour, sometimes bitter also for me too. Like the real, of course, if you like bitter, if you like black coffee, for example, I have to have cream and sugar in my coffee. Well, not sugar, but agave nectar. But, my sister loves black coffee. So did my mom. And it's like, I can't do that. That's bitter. And that just feels like bad news to me. It tastes like bad news. It tastes like an unwelcome surprise. Something that's not on the list, a question that wasn't there, is, do you ever convert people's voices into shapes or patterns or colors? Do you ever think about that?
I don't, but I can very often feel the need to just tune out if the frequency doesn't feel right. And I don't think it's just the content, it's the tone. And I can't listen. I can't listen.
Yes. So I would suggest pay attention to that and ask yourself, go one step further. So for the people who are listening now, if you relate to that, I'm saying go one step further and ask yourself, well, what is it? If I were to put a shape to it, what shape would that be? Because that's quite often all people need right now is that little push to think about that. Noel Till, the great astrologer who I worked with for a long time, and you knew him and attended a few of his seminars and studied with him for a while. And Noel was an opera star with his big booming voice. My husband has a great voice like that also. He was a broadcaster. So I like that kind of voice. But I asked Noel once, thinking that everybody does this. I said, Noel, when you hear voices, don't you convert them to shapes or colors or instruments in the orchestra? And he looked at me like I was from some other universe. Said, again, like my mom did, what is wrong with you? And I said, are you kidding? You're an opera singer. You don't do that? And he goes, absolutely not. But I've always done that with voices, round voices versus pointy voices, voices that have textures in them. Like, I live in the woods, so sometimes I go out and there will be a tree that has fallen that is starting to decay, and it has that wonderful woody sort of textures in it as it's starting to decay. And sometimes people have like a woodwind voice. I used to play in the clarinet in band. I played piano too. Did you play an instrument?
I used to play a violin till the neighbors complained.
So if you were to put a shape to the sound of the violin, what kind of shape would that be versus?
Gosh, that's tricky. It would be a very high. That's tricky. It'd be a very high wave sound. It wouldn't be jagged. It would be smooth but concentrated waves.
Yes.
That kind of a shape.
Yes. And I remember, because I played in band from, gosh, I was 9 years old all the way till I graduated high school. And I loved being in the center of the big sounds. And when I was in high school, our band actually won awards. We did all kinds of great, innovative things. But when I was sitting in the middle of all that sound, I would see shapes and patterns and textures and colors. And it was just rich with sensorial pleasure.
Yeah.
Beautiful. But there's a totally different shape to a woodwind than there is to a brassy instrument than there is to a stringed instrument. Think about that, and some people's voices are more like woodwind voices. Some people's voices are more like brass voices, and those shapes match up. It's fascinating. Barack Obama had a particularly pleasing voice to me. It was a woodwind voice. And when I say decaying wood, like a decaying tree, I don't mean the decay is a bad thing. It just makes it fibrous, right? And that texture of the fibrous.
There's a resonance, isn't there?
Perfect. Yes. Whereas Noel Till had it was not a woodwind voice. It had a more tonal clarity to it. But at any rate, so, what we're doing is converting these sounds I'm converting it in this way into a shape. So I will often tell people, draw it. If this sound were a shape, what shape would it be? Or if it were a color, and so forth. Makes you think, right? Yeah, there are some voices that are like jagged glass going into my brain.
I wish they taught this in school. It would have been so helpful for developing intuition, imagination, awareness in nature. Wouldn't it have been so helpful?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then if we go into astrology and we use this principle in astrology, this is how I would like to teach. Speaking of, each planet has a frequency. And back early in the days when I was an astrologer, but I was also teaching the free soul techniques, which are meditative and psychic development techniques. There is one technique where we soul travel. I can teach people to soul travel. It's like astral travel, but you're doing it in a meditative state. You're not asleep. And I would take these people who knew nothing about astrology, and I said, we're going to soul travel to some of the planets in our solar system. And then there was another technique called blending, which means you merge and you become one with whatever it is that you're visiting. And so I would take them to Jupiter. Let's, as a soul, travel to Jupiter, blend with the planet, and feel, sense, see the energy of that planet. Come back, write it down. These are people who knew nothing about astrology, and they'd come back and say, Jupiter is purple, or Jupiter feels expansive and big. And they would say the key words that we use in astrology. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it really, really is. That's amazing.
Knowing nothing.
But that really says something about the planets literally having frequency, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Having some kind of physical broadcasting, Pythagoras' harmony of the spheres, doesn't it? And I'm sure, recordings have been made, I'm sure you've heard them, Kathy, in the cosmos, these beautiful recordings of planetary orbits, but there's something deeper, I think, that we haven't yet discovered within each of the planets that's very distinctive in terms of their frequency, and I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure we'll discover that eventually, but that's really what you're asking your students to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and the point is, we can sense it. We can train ourselves to sense this.
Yeah.
There's a movie we watched recently, and I can't remember which streaming service it's on, but it's called Chaos Walking. And I don't think I can fully give the synopsis of what the plot was about, but what struck me in that movie was it was about people on Earth in the future who would walk around, and they depicted them in the movie with these scintillating lights and colors all around them, and that their thoughts would be projected, but their thoughts wouldn't be clear words. It would be like muddled little catchphrases here and there, words, but it's chaos walking. So you would hear this muddled, sounds emanating from people as they're thinking or sleeping or walking. And then if a whole group of people are together, you're hearing muddled conversations constantly and all these lights swirling around these people. And I was sitting there watching the movie going, yes, yes, yes. That's how I perceive, and that's why I don't like big crowds. And a lot of people who are high in Neptunian energy say big crowds, all those frequencies, they bother me. I bet you're sensitive to big crowds also, right?
Very much so. Can't go to cities. Just overwhelming sort of density and so much information coming in. So yeah, I'm a country bumpkin. Yeah, certified. I just can't do cities. Even my local very small town. Actually, I haven't been in for about 20 months. But when I used to go in, even then, I felt it was. I couldn't wait to get out and back to nature. It felt too much. So yes, a lot of sense. Well, strong Neptune, as you know, Kathy. So yeah, really, really appreciate that.
And you can fine tune that a bit to get more information. You can ask yourself, is there a color that goes with it? Am I sensing a texture? Am I hearing something? Your physical body is responding, so that. But you can fine tune it. And sometimes we need to fine tune it in order to get more information in certain aspects of life, right?
Yeah, and certainly there's a density to that.
Yes.
Density, not a lightness. There's a heaviness.
There you go. There you go. That's a great way to say it. And for me, it's chaos. It's just, it's overwhelming chaos. And I have to filter through it. We've had to drive through New York City a few times. I don't know how anybody lives in New York. I mean, I guess you get used to it, or you just incorporate it, or you like it, if your system likes all that energy. But for me, it's like, how fast can we get through this city? I could close my eyes and know when we're near it, because I would be feeling that kind of chaos energetically
around.
Jazzed
up, isn't it? Very wired and jazzed up and very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with New York City or big cities. It's just, that's how I perceive the frequency of the density of population and all that activity. It converts through your senses. You feel it. The density of the frequency, the heaviness. I just see jagged, chaotic energy that's not organized, which really, really bothers me. So if you start combining planetary energies, if you combine Mars and Uranus, for example, maybe they're conjunct, square, or opposite in the zodiac, then you're taking these energies and you're making a dynamic statement through all your senses. So if you put Mars and Uranus together, and you were to create a sound or a smell or a texture, let's start with texture. What would the texture, if you went to a fabric store and I said, go get me a Mars Uranus fabric?
It would be very rough. It would be very rough. It certainly wouldn't be smooth. There's a speed aspect to this as well, though, isn't there? And an explosiveness.
Yes.
So
you would think more in terms of rhythm with this.
Yes.
As opposed to texture.
A speed, suddenness, explosiveness, erratic quality. That's how I think of that combo. Pretty hard to have.
And the rhythm, bop, 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 bop. Or it wouldn't even be stable. It
wouldn't be regular. It would be irregular.
Yes. And so if you even just think about music and you say, if I were to draw signature shapes for different kinds of music, classical would have one shape, jazz would have another shape, rock and roll would have another shape. Or if I were to think of a planet that goes with hardcore rock and roll, what planet might that be? It wouldn't be Venus, right?
No, it'd be Uranus, I think.
Or maybe Mars. Or Mars with drums.
Yes, primal. Something very primal. primordial. Yeah.
So then we think, how did the ancient astrologers decide on colors that go with the signs? How did the ancient astrologers assign rulership to, a potato is ruled by this sign or this planet, because they have those. How did they come up with Saturn is cold and it's not moist, dry, I guess. I can't off the top of my head because I experience it slightly differently. But in my sense, they're sensing frequency.
Absolutely. Well, that was their entertainment, wasn't it? Because they had no computers, television, cinemas. That was their entertainment. So I guess their imagination just flourished, talking about the gods that lived on the planets. And that was, that was how they entertained each other in the evening. So, they could be quite colorful about those experiences as well.
And open-minded.
Yes. Open to the skies and open-minded. Yes. Yeah, that's really...
Because, see, I haven't mentioned Maverick at all, but the Maverick approach would be to be independent in your thinking and to say, hey, how I'm feeling this is appropriate for me. I'm going to honor it. Just because somebody else may not feel it the same way doesn't mean it's not appropriate for me. The Maverick approach would give yourself permission to experience it the way you are experiencing it, or the independence or the courage, right? So when we think of Mars and we think of red, of course, I know the planet itself looks red when you look at it, but you think of Mars and, like chili peppers. If you were to take a bite of a chili pepper, you would think red probably, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a hot, aggressive energy, isn't it?
Yes, that color has a frequency and it can convert to all of our senses. If we start thinking about that, everything is frequency.
Absolutely. And we're going to get a greater and greater appreciation of that, I think, as we move forward. It always has been. We just haven't been very conscious of it. So what you're doing here is making people more conscious of what has already been, but will become even more apparent as we move forwards.
It engages the creative brain.
Yeah, the right brain, very much so.
And part of the Maverick signature really is that open-ended creativity, the ability to reach into the universal mind and pull out these concepts. That's the Maverick approach in a way, with a lot of courage. Yeah, it's fearlessness to do so.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And as you say, it's very subjective. It's Maverick because it's very subjective. But if that's your experience, in esoteric theory, there's only ever us in the universe. So it doesn't matter, as you say, what everybody else thinks, because there's only you there anyway, according to esoteric philosophy.
And you're still converting information into senses so that you understand more. That's really the purpose of this. Because again, I think I mentioned this in one of the other podcasts, the first time I ever gave a lecture and I talked about planets as frequencies. And I did the exercise, if Neptune were a fabric and a color, what kind of fabric would it be? If Venus were a fabric and a color, what kind of, what would that be? Because you put Neptune and Venus together and there's some similarities, right? They'd both be light fabrics. They'd be smooth. They'd be delicate. They wouldn't be fabrics you would wear out into the woods when there are brambles, right?
Yeah, it'd be silk, something exquisite.
Yes.
Yeah,
or
really
gauzy, or just, and they'd be pastel and they'd be just beautiful. I was saying to people, if you put those feelings together, then you think about somebody with a Venus-Neptune conjunction in their chart. They're going to have that frequency. They're going to have that sensitivity, which is why I use the word sensitivity with Neptune. It's delicate. It's a delicate energy. It's not like Pluto. It's not like Saturn.
And it's a sensitivity to beauty as well, isn't it? It's the aesthetic talents as well.
It's a fine weave. It's like when you buy some sheets with a really high thread count.
Yeah. Love those. Yeah, Egyptian cotton. Versus the real scratchy kind, I mean,
if I said, go to the fabric store and get me some Mars Pluto fabric, how would that be different?
Oh, it'd be heavy, very
Mhm.
heavy fabric in weight, a lot of density to it, probably dark color,
Mhm.
very dark red, because Pluto I think of as black and Mars red, so very, very dark
Mhm.
red, real heavy weight, almost
Mhm.
like a tapestry.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you did Mars Saturn, it's similar, but then there's that durability.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I like canvas.
Canvas, exactly. I think of Mars Saturn. If you're going to have Mars Saturn fabric, it's going to be like what the military wears when they go out to battle.
Yeah.
You roll around in the dirt and the mud. You get scratches all over it, and it doesn't rip, it doesn't tear. You just brush it off.
So interesting, because of course Mars Saturn's quite a militaristic aspect, isn't it? You see it in charts of the people who go into the military.
Exactly.
So
if you're talking to a client, or you're looking at mundane astrology and there's a Mars Saturn aspect going on, or a Mars Pluto aspect going on, that energy's in the air, or that person is keyed to that frequency. So think about in family dynamics. If you have one child that is a Mars Saturn type and another child that's a Venus Neptune type, you're going to treat them differently because they're wired to different energetic signatures. They're wired to different frequencies.
And their experience of you as the same mother will be entirely different, of course.
Yes. And then we think about the fact, as the mother or the father, if you are wired to specific frequencies, which are very different than your children's, you have to make that adjustment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
If you're a Venus Neptune type, how difficult is it for you to understand a Mars Saturn type? Because the frequencies are so opposite. And again, you can conceptualize that, gauzy, beautiful silk that's delicate versus canvas, or what is the type of material that they wear? I can't remember the name of it for military.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's sort of almost
uniforms.
Camouflage kit. Yeah, it's very tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's very, it's rough, it's scratchy. But see, here we're still talking astrology, but we're converting it to frequency. We're converting it through other senses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Stretching your senses and your awareness, really. And yes, it's really interesting.
Well, and the same goes for food. If you're cooking, for example, I use synesthesia all the time when I cook. So what I'm doing is putting textures or smells together, or because I don't cook by recipe, I make things up. I throw them together because I'm using multi-senses when I'm doing it. Creative cooks do that.
Yeah, and imagine what it tastes like. It needs a little bit of celery salt, or whatever. You imagine how it's going to taste without actually tasting it.
Or you're stirring the batter and you're getting that textural sense. You're converting it to colors. I used to do that. What triggered a lot of this for me was when I started making mandalas. I was doing it from birth, but when I started making mandalas, the colors and the shapes and the patterns created sound. So sometimes when I listen to music, I get colors, but when I work with colors, I get sound. And when a mandala was finished, it would sing.
Wow.
It would make this glorious sound because I did, cut papers, little tiny pieces of cut paper glued together. And if I didn't get the shapes right before I would glue it, it would be dissonance. It's like something's wrong. It's like driving through New York City, right? It's like the same kind of feeling. It's chaos. Something needs to be adjusted in this mandala. And I would change the shapes and then it would sing. It's like, oh, okay, it's right now.
Wow.
And
but it's the symmetry that's producing a kind of harmony.
And when I used to do shows with my booth filled with mandalas, I'd have a 10 by 10 booth and it'd be floor to ceiling on all the walls of the booth filled with mandalas. people used to come in, and people who had no idea about frequencies, and they would just stand there and get sucked into mandala energy because it's a palpable frequency that is emitted by symmetry, shapes, colors, and patterns.
Wow. So they were standing in an orchestra, really?
Yes. Yeah, they would sense it on whatever level, but their face would go blank and they would stare, and then they would come out and go, wow, what was that all about? It's like, yeah. But, all they need is a little education.
Yeah. And that's actually very healing as well, isn't it? Because of the harmonious aspect to the mandalas. There's something about the coherence of pattern that's very healing, because when we're not well, there's an incoherence in the energy.
Yes.
We know this, don't we? So what you're doing is not only producing the music in your head that you experience, but you're producing healing for whoever views the mandala.
And you just said it. When you're not well, if you're thinking of yourself as frequency, there's a difference between a day when you're tired. You go, I know the frequency of fatigue versus the frequency of something is off in my system. Because the energy changes in your physical system before you manifest an illness.
Yeah, because
the frequency,
etheric, doesn't it? Before it becomes physicalized.
And you can catch it. You can catch it if you tune in. Yeah. It's like, is this low back ache simply because I did intense yard work? Or is there a misalignment? And you tune into that by the frequency of it if you pay attention. So you see, there are practical applications of this, but you have to take that extra step and sense and be creative and use all your senses, because I can already hear some people going, oh, how is this practical? Come on. If you convert a voice into shapes or colors, how is that practical? Well, it just gives you more information.
Yeah, and our self-healing ability is going to accelerate a great deal.
Very much.
Yeah.
That Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, starting the air mutation for 200 years, I think is going to focus on the body, mind, spirit connection. And the power.
Frequency, the coherence of the frequency. Yeah.
And so think about when you say something positive and that sound frequency goes out into the etheric, goes out into the quantum field. That's frequency. It has sound waves to it. And if you were to draw, how would those positive sound waves look versus a negative statement? Or what color would it be? There is a workshop I would love to do sometime. And I would love to have everybody just sip some wine. I give them markers and colored pencils. And I would love astrologers to do this and say, draw your chart. Random shapes, colors, patterns, draw the chart. What does your chart look like in terms of colors, shapes, and patterns?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't that be fascinating?
Yeah. That's really,
Go beyond the logical brain, go beyond the keywords, draw the energy of the chart.
And of course, we've all got very different parts in our chart. Some yin, some yang, some, very, very passive and pleasant, pleasing, and others very challenging. Lots of hard aspects. So they're very, very different aspects. It is, as we well know, Kathy, just one big pattern. It's a whole clash of geometry, isn't it?
Yes. If I'm talking to a client who's an engineer, but I don't know their profession, and I've tuned in before I've talked to them, engineers have a specific shape that I see, and it's like a staircase, right angles. It's very orderly. It's very linear. It's compartment, it's very much like a staircase. Whereas if I'm talking to an artist or a creative type, I'm seeing swirling clouds and moving, flowing energy. It's totally different. Now, one's not better than the other, but if I see that staircase, right angle sort of energy, I say, are you an engineer? I'll say, how did you know? And that wasn't from the chart. It's because they have a signature energy about them. Engineer, and that's how I see it. Maybe somebody else would see an engineer with a different pattern, but it serves me well. If I'm talking to somebody, it's like there's that left brain engineering need to put it in order in a certain way versus the abstract flowing artistic brain.
Yeah, there's a very driving logic to that, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Categorization. Absolutely. Wow.
And we risk in astrology, I think, and this is probably because I value the right brain so much. So maybe my perspective is skewed, but there's always the risk to become too much of the academic astrologer or the research astrologer, and not enough applying it with clients, not enough of the creative synthesis, coming together of all the energies, the creative connection that happens, by the book versus creative connections. And we can say that in all of life too. All of life.
That's where the magic happens, isn't it? That connection with the client, because we can look at the chart and prepare the chart, but until we speak to the client, we have no idea how they're living out that, they're playing that piece of music. And so we need to have, as astrologers, quite a wide toolkit to connect with them at whatever life they're living and still be helpful. And that's where the magic happens.
Exactly. And that comes through experience and also training if you've never been exposed to that way of thinking. But that's why doing astrology by Google search is so dangerous right now, which happens all the time. I get clients all the time said, well, I Googled my chart and I can tell you what everything means. And I say, but can you put it together and apply the spectrum of expression? On what level are you living your chart? It's like they get really mad. But left brain, right brain, structured engineer approach versus artistic creative approach. But we need both. Yeah.
It's interesting though. We all start learning astrology like Lego, don't we? The Lego pieces. We each, understand the meaning of the planets and the signs and the aspects, etc. But it's the synthesis, which I think only comes with experience of what the whole chart means, with all its dimensions and dynamics. There's a synthesizing ability, and you can't rush that. That, as you say, Kathy, it comes through a lot of years of experience to feel the chart rather than just express it as a series of Lego pieces.
And that's why astrology has, in some circles, a very bad reputation, because people will say, not all Virgos are picky.
Yes.
Because they're just used to the sun sign approach. This means that cookbook quality, as opposed to frequency. I can feel the frequency of a Virgo from a mile away. It has a certain frequency that's very different than, let's say, a Gemini or a Cancer, or, but, just asking yourself, can I involve all my senses and the frequency of that with this horoscope?
I think it's wonderful. This is an important conversation, because I'm going to think about that not only when I'm in nature or making food, but also, in client consultations that I have booked. I'm really going to think about that ahead of time, because it will expand the communication. And that's exactly what I wanted to do with this. In one of the next podcasts, I'm going to have Diane Samsel. I think you know her. She is an astrologer. She wrote a book on animal communication, and she has had hardcore synesthesia her whole life, just like I have. So we're going to talk about that to the next level of somebody who's been using it their entire life. And we'll hear more examples from her and how she uses that with animal communication. Of course. How beautiful is that? So sensitive, beautiful, wonderful work.
Speaking of that, my little grandpuppy, the Boxer, my daughter's dog, the Boxer, he's such a love. But when I hear dogs bark, the sound of their bark gives me information. And he has a bark that is just beautiful, deep and resonant and masculine and like a woodwind, it has such echoey resonance to it that when you hear his bark, that his bark is stronger than his bite, because this is a dog where, he would just wiggle himself and, enjoy wherever he meets, even if he just barked like that. But there's a dog across the street that is fairly aggressive, that doesn't like other dogs, doesn't like other humans, and has a bark that is so tight that all I have to do is hear that bark and go, nope, that's a dog I'm staying away from.
Yeah. You just can feel the tension in it.
Yes. So here we go. I mean, we could go on and on and on with this. You can use this in so many areas of life. And the reason I stumble with my words is because this really is a Neptunian topic, and Neptune doesn't want to be grounded. Neptune is kind of spacey and flowing and evanescent. And when I talk this, I get more spacey than when I actually do it. Does that make sense?
Because it's almost like you feel it in the body rather than, or certainly more than your left brain. It's beyond the words, isn't it? Because so much of this is a feeling thing. It's a body thing rather than a mind thing. Exactly.
It's through one of the 5 senses. And if you allow those senses to communicate, to perceive together, because that's what the word synesthesia actually means, perceives together, if it's translated. If you let them cross-populate, which I think makes your brain stronger and more active, it's like it percolates. It's like what happens in compost as things under the surface are breaking down, those little molecules and all that action that happens. I want to have that in my brain. I don't want it to compost, but I want to have that action in my brain. You see what I'm saying? I mean, this is how my brain works all the time. I'm making those visual connections and otherwise.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You're a true artist with this, Kathy. You really are. And it comes through in those beautiful mandalas. They're really magnificent. They're all original, aren't they? Totally original.
Yeah, thank you. But you're using this all the time. And I you may not be totally aware of it. You're going to be more aware of it now. But it's clear in your work. You're sensing energy, you're sensing frequencies, you're putting this all together. Now, when you go to the next level, because you're more conscious, it's going to be fascinating.
Well, that's a blessing. So, I thank you for that, because I just haven't been very aware of it at all before this conversation, truly. So it's going to open up another dimension as well.
And I think we're all doing it automatically all the time. And again, if a scientist says to me, either you're born with synesthesia or you're not, I'm going to challenge them and say, I've lived this and I've developed it and I've trained other people to activate it within them. So you can't tell me, but that's the Maverick approach, right?
No limitations.
So in that very first question I asked you, translating to Portuguese, and you were on your knees sobbing with laughter, that's because you were not taking yourself seriously.
No, it was hilarious. I wish I could share it better, but one of those moments you had to be there. You just had to be there.
We had one of those experiences when we first moved here to Virginia Beach, and we were down at an art show that was on the boardwalk. And this was 25 years ago. And my husband and I were both eating a sandwich that we got from one of the vendors there. And a seagull flew over my husband's head and pooped on his forehead. And this was in the hot part of the summer. And I'm in the middle of taking the bite of the sandwich, and I'm seeing seagull poop sliding down his forehead. And I literally laughed so hard I couldn't speak, and I'm just pointing because he didn't know yet that there was poop on his forehead. And I'm on my knees, laughing, pointing, falling to the ground, and people are looking at me like I'm insane. And I'm thinking, come on, people, lighten up. If you don't see the humor in this. And then he finally figured it out and wiped it off. But it is one of the funniest, happiest memories that I have.
Yeah.
Seagull poop,
Just
melting
so
on a forehead. Why do we take ourselves so seriously? Saturn. Isn't that Saturn?
Yeah, totally.
Gravity.
Yeah, got to be controlled, got to be disciplined, got to be well behaved, not disturb, not step out of line. Absolutely. And I think you and I have learned not to do that.
Yeah, and hopefully we can spread it out into the world. Well, thank you so
Well,
much once again.
yeah, that was really fascinating. Really enjoyed it. Very different, very, very different, and loved it.
Wonderful. Okay, till next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.